Before wars begin, before markets crash, before revolutions rise, there is always something moving beneath the surface of society, invisible, powerful, unpredictable. It is not written in laws, not stored in buildings, not controlled by logic alone. It lives in people. When they gather, when they feel together, when they believe together. A force that can build nations or destroy them overnight. A force that turns calm individuals into a single emotional being. Throughout history, this force has shaped empires, inspired movements, sparked conflicts, and driven change at a scale no single person could achieve alone. Yet most of us never notice the moment it begins to influence us. This audiobook is not just about psychology. It is about the hidden mechanism behind history itself. The emotional currents beneath crowds, the power of belief, the influence of leaders, the danger and potential of collective minds. Once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere. In politics, in media, in markets, online, in everyday life. Welcome to a deeper understanding of human behavior. Welcome to the psychology of crowds.
The Psychology of Crowds, Reimagined for Modern Minds. Part 1. The Birth of the Crowd Mind. Opening Atmosphere. Imagine this: a peaceful man, kind, rational, educated. Now place him in a crowd. Suddenly, he shouts. He believes things he never believed. He feels powerful. He stops thinking and starts reacting. What changed? Not the world, not the facts. Only one thing changed. He is no longer an individual. He has become part of a crowd. And when a human enters a crowd, he loses himself, but gains something else: a collective mind. Tonight, we explore one of the most dangerous and most powerful psychological forces in human history. Chapter 1. The Era of Crowds. We like to believe history is shaped by great leaders, kings, presidents, philosophers. But modern history whispers a different truth. The real ruler of the modern world is not the king, not the genius, not the law. It is the crowd. Narration. Reflective tone. There was a time when nations were guided by elites, small groups of thinkers, strategists, scholars. But today, elections are decided by masses. Markets crash because of mass panic. Wars start from mass emotions. Trends spread in hours. Civilization has entered the age of the crowd mind. And the strange thing is, most people do not even know they are being ruled by it. What is a crowd, psychologically? A crowd is not just people standing together. A crowd is born the moment personal responsibility fades, emotions synchronize, thinking slows, and suggestion takes control. At that moment, individual minds dissolve, and a collective mind emerges. Important truth. A crowd can be heroic, generous, brave, or violent, irrational, destructive. Because a crowd does not operate by logic, it operates by emotion, suggestion, Contagion. Why do intelligent people become foolish in crowds? Here is the shocking psychological law. In a crowd, intelligence does not multiply. Stupidity multiplies. Not because people become stupid, but because their higher thinking shuts down and their primitive instincts wake up. Inside every civilized person lives fear, aggression, tribal loyalty, blind belief. When alone, reason controls them. In a crowd, instinct takes the wheel. Pause. Reflection. Have you ever laughed at something not funny because others laughed? Felt anger online because everyone else was angry? Believed news without checking because it felt true? That wasn't you. That was the crowd mind borrowing your body. The three forces that create the crowd mind. 1. Anonymity leads to loss of responsibility. In a crowd, no one feels personally accountable. I didn't do it. We did. And when responsibility disappears, fear of consequences disappears too. 2. Contagion. Emotions spread like virus. In crowds, fear spreads, anger spreads, hope spreads, violence spreads. Faster than logic ever could. Emotion is infectious. Reason is slow. The crowd chooses speed. 3. Suggestibility. Hypnotic state. A crowd behaves like a person under hypnosis. Critical thinking fades. Images, slogans, symbols become more powerful than truth. That's why crowds follow simple messages, strong leaders, dramatic ideas, not complex explanations. The transformation. When a man enters a crowd, he loses personal judgment, loses individuality, loses long-term thinking, but gains a feeling of power, emotional intensity, readiness to act. This is why crowds can be revolutionary, religious, fanatical, heroic, or catastrophic. Deep reflection moment. Civilization requires patience, reason, self-control. Crowds naturally reject all three. That's why crowds can destroy civilizations, but they rarely build them. End of Part 1. Transition. So now we know a crowd is not just a group of people. It's a new psychological being with its own mind, its own instincts, its own soul. And once formed, even the smartest person inside it cannot fully escape its influence. But the next question is more dangerous. What emotions dominate crowds? Why are they extreme, impulsive, and absolute? Why do crowds believe with religious intensity? That's where we go next.
Take a slow breath and imagine this scene. A man stands alone on a quiet street. He is calm, polite, reasonable. If you ask his opinion, he thinks before answering. If you disagree, he listens. If he is angry, he controls himself. Now, place that same man inside a massive crowd. Noise rising, people shouting, energy vibrating in the air. Watch closely. His posture changes. His voice grows louder. His certainty increases. His doubts disappear. He begins to shout things he never said before. He believes things he never examined. He feels powerful, almost invincible. What happened? Nothing about his intelligence changed. Nothing about reality changed. Only one thing changed. He is no longer an individual. He has entered a psychological organism called the crowd. This is the first great law of crowd psychology. When individuals enter a crowd, they do not simply stand side by side. They fuse into a different kind of mind. Not physically, psychologically. It is as if a switch turns off. Individual identity, personal responsibility, private doubt. And another switch turns on. Collective emotion, shared belief, group instinct. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever left a stadium, a protest, a concert, and later thought, why was I so intense? Why did I feel so swept away? That feeling is the crowd mind borrowing your nervous system. Your brain was not built for modern society. It was built for tribes. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on staying with the group, feeling what the group felt, reacting together. If the tribe panicked, you ran. If the tribe attacked, you attacked. If the tribe celebrated, you celebrated. Thinking too long could mean death. So your brain evolved a shortcut. Synchronize first, analyze later. In crowds, that ancient system wakes up. Adrenaline rises, heart rate increases, mirror neurons activate. You begin to copy emotions automatically. You don't decide to feel, you absorb feelings. Picture a packed stadium. One referee decision. 50,000 people shout at once. You don't know the rules deeply. You didn't even see clearly. But your body reacts instantly. Anger feels justified because everyone around you feels it too. Emotion becomes evidence. The crowd creates reality. Inside a crowd, something subtle disappears. The sense of I. It gets replaced by we. And this changes everything. Alone, you ask, should I do this? In a crowd, you ask, are we doing this? Responsibility dissolves into the group. And when responsibility fades, fear of consequences fades too. That is why ordinary people can commit extraordinary acts, good or bad, in crowds. Bring to mind a moment in your life when you went along with a group decision, even though part of you hesitated. Notice that memory. Notice the pressure of belonging. This is not weakness. This is human wiring. When enough individuals synchronize emotionally, a new psychological entity forms, not metaphorically, functionally. This collective mind has traits different from any single member. It is more emotional, more impulsive, less rational, more extreme. Like water molecules becoming a wave. Each drop is calm. The wave can crash with enormous force. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Education does not cancel crowd influence. Professors, doctors, engineers all become susceptible inside emotional groups. Because the crowd does not operate on knowledge. It operates on emotion and suggestion. Your rational brain is like a quiet voice. The crowd is like a stadium speaker. Guess which one wins? Now imagine not a physical crowd, but a digital one. A trending topic, thousands of angry comments, one viral video clip. You feel something rising in your chest, indignation, certainty. You share, react, judge. You didn't investigate deeply, but it felt obvious. That is modern crowd psychology. The crowd no longer needs a street. It lives in your screen. Let's name the forces forming this new mind. Number 1, anonymity. You feel less individually visible. Your personal identity blurs. Number 2, contagion. Emotions jump from person to person faster than thought. Number 3, suggestibility. The mind becomes more open to simple ideas, images, and slogans. Together, these create a mental state similar to hypnosis. Critical thinking softens, impressions harden. Together, these create a mental state similar to hypnosis. Critical thinking softens, impressions harden. Together, these create a mental state similar to hypnosis. Critical thinking softens, impressions harden. Together, these create a mental state similar to hypnosis. Critical thinking softens, impressions harden. Together, these create a mental state similar to hypnosis. Critical thinking softens, impressions harden.
In the last part, we discovered that when individuals gather, a new mind is born. A mind that does not think, but feels. A mind that does not reason, but reacts. Now we go deeper, because the real danger of crowds is not just how they think, but how they feel. Fire and Charcoal, Chapter 2, The Emotional Nature of Crowds. A crowd is not logical, it is emotional. But not normal emotions, extreme emotions. In a crowd, feelings do not exist in shades, only in absolutes. Love becomes worship, doubt becomes certainty, anger becomes rage, belief becomes fanaticism. Why are crowd emotions so extreme? Because crowds lack two things: critical thinking and personal responsibility. When these disappear, nothing slows emotion down. A crowd does not say, maybe. It says, always, never, everyone, no one. Crowd psychology is black and white thinking is the birthplace of conflict. Impulsiveness. The crowd cannot wait. An individual can think, let me sleep on this decision. A crowd cannot. A crowd lives only in the present moment. It reacts to a speech, a rumor, a symbol, a headline, and acts instantly. No long-term thinking, no analysis, just stimulus to reaction. Real-world parallel, reflective. Stock market crashes. One rumor spreads, people panic, everyone sells. Not because of data, but because of collective emotion. The crowd mind does not ask, is this true? It asks, is everyone feeling this? The crowd mind does not ask, is this true? It's it. Is everyone feeling this? Credulity. Why do crowds believe the impossible? Here's a disturbing truth. The more people gather, the easier it becomes to believe lies. In a crowd, imagination replaces observation. Images replace facts. Stories replace evidence. Why? Because the crowd thinks in pictures, not arguments. If you give a crowd a dramatic slogan, a powerful image, a symbolic enemy, you control its emotions, and whoever controls emotions controls the crowd. Pause. Inner question. Have you noticed how a single video clip online can create global outrage in hours? No investigation, no context, just emotion spreading like fire. That is crowd psychology operating at internet speed. Extremity. Everything is bigger in a crowd. Crowds do not experience mild feelings. Small problem, huge crisis. Small insult, national outrage. Small hope, massive movement. Why? Because emotion is amplified by shared energy. One angry person is manageable. 1,000 angry people create a psychological storm. Intolerance. Crowds hate doubt. Crowds are uncomfortable with uncertainty. They want clear heroes, clear villains, clear answers. If you question the crowd's belief, you become the enemy. That is why crowds cancel, attack, silence. Not because they are evil, but because doubt threatens their emotional unity. Key insight. The crowd's belief system behaves like religion, not because of gods, but because of absolute certainty, emotional devotion, and intolerance of opposition. Crowds do not think ideas, they worship them. The paradox of crowd morality. Here comes the most surprising part. Crowds can be the most brutal and the most heroic. A crowd can lynch an innocent man. A crowd can also risk death for freedom, justice, or faith. Why both? Because crowds are not guided by reason, they are guided by suggestion. If the suggestion is noble, heroic acts. If the suggestion is hateful, monstrous acts. The crowd has power without judgment. Like fire, it can warm or burn cities. Deep reflection moment. Think about revolutions. Think about wars. Think about movements that changed history. They were not built by calm debates. They were driven by crowds feeling something bigger than themselves. Emotion is the engine of history. Reason is only the steering wheel. And in crowds, the steering wheel is often missing. Why are crowds dangerous to civilization? Civilization depends on patience, law, dialogue, complex thinking. Crowds reject all four. They prefer speed, force, certainty, simple answers. That is why crowds can destroy systems quickly, but struggle to build stable ones. Transition reflection. So now we understand. Crowds are emotional volcanoes. They believe easily, feel deeply, react instantly, think in extremes, and because of that, they are easily led. Which brings us to the next critical question. Who controls the crowd? How do leaders manipulate masses? Why do simple slogans overpower complex truths?
Close your eyes for a moment and remember the last time you felt a strong emotion. Anger, excitement, fear, pride. Now imagine that same emotion, not inside one person, but inside 10,000, all at once, all feeding each other. That is not just emotion anymore. It becomes a psychological force of nature. The first law of crowd emotion. A crowd does not feel the way individuals feel. It feels in amplified form. Inside a crowd, concern becomes panic. Disagreement becomes outrage. Admiration becomes worship. Suspicion becomes conspiracy. Why? Because emotion inside a crowd has no brakes. Why emotions escalate? When you are alone, emotion passes through filters, logic, memory, consequences, social norms. But inside a crowd, these filters weaken. Instead, 3 accelerators appear: shared energy, emotional imitation, loss of self-awareness. Your brain starts asking, what are we feeling? Not, what do I think? Scene, the sudden panic. Imagine a crowded mall. Someone runs.
No one knows why, but movement spreads. Fear spreads faster than information. People run before they understand. That is emotional contagion. Emotion travels at the speed of instinct. Reason travels at the speed of thought. Instinct always wins the race. Impulsiveness. The crowd lives in the present. An individual can pause. A crowd cannot. Crowds react instantly to a rumor, a speech, a symbol, a video. There is no "let's wait," no "let's verify," only feel, act. That's why crowds can change history in hours, while individuals need months to decide. Credulity. Why crowds believe easily. Here's a key shift in psychology. Inside a crowd, imagination becomes stronger than evidence. If something feels emotionally true, it is accepted as true. This is why dramatic stories spread faster than facts, why shocking headlines outperform careful analysis, why images beat statistics. The crowd mind thinks in pictures, not probabilities. Reflection moment. Think about a time you reacted emotionally to news before checking details. That moment was not stupidity. It was your brain syncing with a digital crowd. Exaggeration. The crowd magnifies everything. Crowds have no middle ground. Small issue, crisis. Small victory, historic moment. Minor insult, collective humiliation. Shared emotion works like an amplifier. Every reaction echoes back louder. One angry voice triggers 10. 10 trigger 1,000. Emotion becomes an avalanche. Intolerance. Why crowds hate doubt. Crowds need emotional unity. Doubt breaks unity. So the crowd treats doubt like a threat. Inside crowd thinking, if you question, you oppose. If you hesitate, you betray. This is not deliberate cruelty. It is psychological defense. Certainty keeps the emotional structure stable. Uncertainty destabilizes it. Scene, online outrage. A post goes viral. Anger rises. Someone says, maybe we don't know the full story. Instant backlash. Not because people hate truth, but because doubt interrupts shared emotion. The crowd protects its feeling more than it protects facts. Crowd morality. The paradox. Here's something fascinating. Crowds can be incredibly cruel or incredibly heroic. A crowd can destroy a person. A crowd can also sacrifice for strangers. Why the extremes? Because crowd morality is not guided by balanced reasoning. It is guided by dominant emotion. If compassion dominates, heroism. If anger dominates, violence. The crowd has power without moderation, like fire. Scene, 2 crowds. One crowd storms a building in rage. Another crowd forms a human chain during a disaster to save lives. Same psychology, different emotional trigger. The crowd is not moral or immoral by nature. It is emotionally programmable. Why emotion rules history. When we study history, we focus on dates and leaders. But underneath events is always this: mass emotion. Fear moves armies. Hope fuels revolutions. Humiliation creates conflicts. Pride sustains nations. Crowds are the emotional engines of history. Leaders only steer. Deep reflection. Civilization asks us to slow down. Crowds push us to speed up. Civilization values nuance. Crowds prefer certainty.
Civilization builds gradually. Crowds explode suddenly. Understanding this tension is understanding modern society. Closing atmosphere. Now you see why crowds are powerful. They don't calculate, they ignite. They don't weigh evidence, they feel intensity. And once emotion spreads through thousands of minds, it becomes almost unstoppable, unless someone understands the psychology behind it. And that is where we go next, because emotion alone is energy, but energy always seeks direction.
A crowd is powerful, emotional, impulsive, ready to act. But by itself, a crowd is like electricity without wiring, raw energy, no direction. So the real question becomes, who gives the crowd its direction? The answer is older than history. Leaders. The leader, not the smartest person. Here's the first illusion we must destroy. Crowds are not led by the most intelligent people. They are led by the most convinced, the most confident, the most emotionally intense. A crowd does not follow logic, it follows certainty. Doubt sounds weak, nuance sounds confusing, but absolute conviction? That sounds like truth. In crowds, confidence beats competence. Why crowds need leaders? Remember, a crowd has emotion but no structure, energy but no coordination. The leader provides direction, focus, and a simple narrative. He takes scattered emotions and turns them into one mission. Without a leader, a crowd is noise. With a leader, it becomes a force. The psychology of a crowd leader. Most crowd leaders share traits: strong belief, even if mistaken, simplicity of thought, repetition, dramatic expression, personal sacrifice or image of sacrifice. They often begin as rebels, prophets, outsiders. Why? Because crowds admire those who seem to stand above normal fear. A leader of crowds is often hypnotized by his own idea first. He believes so deeply that his certainty becomes contagious. Belief spreads faster than proof. The three weapons of mass influence. Leaders don't persuade crowds using arguments. They use psychological tools. 1. Affirmation. Simple, bold statements. Crowds respond to, "This is true, this is wrong, we will win," not, "on the other hand," or "statistically speaking." The simpler the message, the deeper it penetrates. 2. Repetition. Repetition is hypnosis. An idea repeated enough times feels like reality. The crowd forgets where it heard it first. It only remembers, "I've heard this everywhere, it must be true." 3. Contagion through emotion. Leaders use tone, gestures, symbols, music, crowd energy, because emotion spreads faster than words. A speech is not just heard, it is felt. Symbols, the shortcut to the crowd mind. Crowds think in images, not logic. That is why flags, logos, uniforms, hand gestures, anthems are more powerful than arguments. A symbol compresses an idea into a feeling, and feelings move crowds. Ask yourself, why do movements always have symbols? Because the crowd mind understands pictures better than philosophy. The power of prestige. Prestige is psychological authority. It can come from fame, success, uniforms, titles, confidence. When a leader has prestige, crowds stop questioning. Prestige shuts down critical thinking. It creates automatic obedience. That is why fallen leaders lose power fast. Once prestige cracks, the spell breaks. How leaders turn ideas into action. A leader does not give complex plans. He gives a dream, an enemy, a promise. Crowds need hope, fear, purpose. The leader combines them. We are the solution. They are the problem. Together we win. Simple story, massive impact. Deep reflection. History's most powerful leaders of crowds were not always the wisest, but they understood something critical. People in crowds do not seek truth. They seek meaning, belonging, direction. And whoever provides those owns the crowd. The dark side. This is why propaganda works. Demagogues rise. Mass movements explode. The crowd is powerful, but easily steered. It can be led towards freedom or destruction, progress or catastrophe. The difference is not the crowd. The difference is the influence guiding it. So now we know, crowds feel deeply. Leaders direct them. Symbols hypnotize them. Repetition programs them. But one mystery remains. Why do crowd beliefs become so rigid? Why do ideas survive even when proven false? Why do crowds resist change but still fall into revolutions? That's where psychology becomes even deeper.
Energy alone does nothing. A storm at sea is just chaos until wind gives it direction. Crowds are the same. They contain enormous emotional energy. But without guidance, that energy is noise. With a leader, it becomes history. Crowds are not led by the most intelligent people. They are led by the most certain people. Certainty feels like strength. Doubt feels like weakness. Inside a crowd's emotional atmosphere, calm analysis sounds cold, but conviction sounds like truth. That is why the loudest voice often becomes the guiding voice. Think of a time someone spoke with total confidence and others followed. Not because they proved it, but because they believed it. Belief is contagious. A crowd feels intensely, but it does not know what to do with its feelings. Emotion creates pressure. The leader releases that pressure by giving direction. He gives the crowd a goal, an explanation, a path forward. Without that, emotional energy turns into confusion. With a leader, confusion turns into movement. Most leaders of crowds share traits. They are driven, obsessed, deeply convinced of their idea. Often they start as outsiders. They may even seem extreme, but that extremity signals something powerful: fearlessness. Crowds admire those who appear untouched by doubt, because doubt is uncomfortable inside collective emotion. Leaders do not win crowds through complex reasoning. They use psychological tools. Let's slow down and feel how each one works. Simple, bold statements. This is our moment. We are right. They are wrong. No hesitation, no nuance. Why it works? The crowd mind is tired of complexity. Affirmation feels like clarity. Picture a leader on stage. He doesn't explain details. He repeats simple truths. The crowd cheers, not because they learned something new, but because their emotion found words. Repetition bypasses logic. An idea heard once is information. Heard 100 times, it becomes reality. The mind confuses familiarity with truth. Soon the crowd says, "Everyone knows this," even if it started yesterday. Tone of voice, facial expression, rhythm of speech, these spread emotion faster than content. A passionate tone can convince before words are processed.
That's why great crowd leaders are performers. They don't just speak ideas, they transmit feeling. Think of a time someone spoke with total confidence and others followed. Not because they proved it, but because they believed it. Belief is contagious. Crowds think in images. Symbols compress complex meaning into emotion. A flag, a color, a gesture, a song. These are psychological shortcuts. They bypass reasoning and connect directly to identity. When a crowd rallies around a symbol, the idea becomes personal, and personal beliefs are defended fiercely. Now you see something most people miss. Crowds don't move on their own. They are moved, not by the smartest voice, but by the most certain, emotional, symbolic voice. And once a leader connects to the emotional frequency of the crowd, logic becomes secondary. The current has been set. We go into the deepest layer, how crowd beliefs become sacred and why they resist logic like religion.
The psychology of crowds, reimagined for modern minds. Beliefs, dogmas, and the religious nature of crowd thinking. We've seen how crowds feel. We've seen how leaders guide them. But now we reach the core, because crowds do not just have opinions, they have beliefs. And once a belief enters the crowd mind, it stops being an idea. It becomes a dogma. What is a crowd belief? An individual belief can change. A crowd belief feels sacred, untouchable, above debate. Crowds do not say, "I think this is true." They say, "This is truth." And anyone who disagrees is not wrong, he is dangerous. When emotion mixes with certainty, belief turns into faith. And faith is the strongest psychological force in history. Why crowd beliefs act like religion? Even when the topic is politics, science, social issues, national identity, crowd belief behaves like religion because it contains emotional devotion, absolute certainty, moral superiority, intolerance of doubt. Crowds do not defend ideas with logic, they defend them with passion. The power of the invisible. Here's something fascinating. Crowds are not moved most by facts, but by myths. Not lies necessarily, but simplified stories that feel meaningful. Stories like, "We are the chosen people," "We are victims," "We are destined for greatness," "The system is evil." These narratives give identity, purpose, and belonging, and that is stronger than truth. Have you noticed how people defend beliefs even when evidence proves them wrong? That's not stubbornness, that's crowd psychology. Because challenging the belief feels like threatening their identity. Why logic cannot break crowd beliefs? You cannot argue someone out of a belief they did not reason themselves into. Crowd beliefs enter through emotion, repetition, suggestion. So facts alone rarely change them. Instead, contradiction often makes them stronger. Opposition feels like persecution, and persecution strengthens faith. The paradox of stability and revolution. Crowds are conservative. They cling to traditions, symbols, and beliefs, but they also create revolutions. How? Because crowds don't reject belief. They replace one belief with another. They don't destroy faith, they transfer it, from king to nation, from religion to ideology, from ideology to movement. The need to believe never disappears,
Only the object changes. The invisible roots of civilization. Civilizations are not built only on laws, they are built on shared beliefs. Ideas like justice, honor, freedom, duty, nation. These are not physical things, they are psychological constructions, and crowds protect them fiercely. When these beliefs weaken, civilizations shake. When they collapse, crowds become destructive. Deep reflection moment. History is not shaped only by armies. It is shaped by beliefs strong enough to move crowds. Beliefs create empires. Beliefs start wars. Beliefs inspire sacrifice. Beliefs outlive generations. The danger of absolute belief. When a belief becomes sacred, questioning becomes betrayal. Doubt becomes sin. Opponents become enemies. At that point, dialogue dies. Only conflict remains. Crowds do not negotiate faith, they fight for it. Key insight. Crowds do not need truth, they need certainty. They do not seek complexity, they seek meaning. And whoever provides meaning shapes history. Transition to next part. So now we understand crowds are emotional, leaders guide them, symbols influence them, beliefs control them, but there's still one final layer. What different kinds of crowds exist? Are all crowds the same? Why are some crowds criminal, some political, some religious? Now we classify the crowd mind. The Psychology of Crowds, Extended Edition. Expanded. Beliefs, dogmas, and the religious nature of crowd thinking. Atmospheric opening. Every civilization stands on something invisible. Not buildings, not armies, not technology, but beliefs. Ideas people feel are sacred. Ideas they defend emotionally. Ideas that give life meaning. Crowds do not just hold beliefs, they live inside them. When an idea stops being an idea. For an individual, an idea can be debated. For a crowd, an idea can become untouchable. Something shifts. The idea moves from the mind into identity. And once that happens, attacking the idea feels like attacking the person. Reflective pause. Think of a belief you feel strongly about. Now imagine someone mocking it publicly. Notice the emotional reaction. That reaction is not about logic. It is about identity. The religious structure of crowd beliefs. Even when beliefs are political, social, or cultural, their psychological structure is religious. They contain certainty, devotion, moral conviction, intolerance of doubt. The subject changes, the structure remains. Crowds do not just hold beliefs, they revere them. Why myths are more powerful than facts. Facts inform, myths inspire. A myth is not necessarily false. It is a simplified, emotionally powerful story that gives meaning. Crowds are moved by meaning more than accuracy. Stories like, "We are destined," "We are oppressed," "We are chosen," "We are under threat." These narratives activate deep emotion. Emotion creates unity. Unity creates power. Scene, the symbolic story. A nation rallies not around data charts, but around a story of struggle and identity. A movement grows not from statistics, but from a narrative of injustice. Stories bind emotion together. Why logic rarely changes crowd beliefs. Beliefs formed emotionally are defended emotionally. If you attack them with facts, it feels like an attack on dignity. This creates resistance, and resistance strengthens belief. The crowd mind does not say, "Let me reconsider." It says, "I must defend this." The need to believe. Humans do not live on reason alone. We need meaning, purpose, belonging. Beliefs provide psychological stability. Without shared beliefs, societies feel fragmented. With extreme beliefs, societies become rigid. Balance is rare. Tradition, the invisible force. Crowds respect tradition deeply. Even when they revolt, they often build new traditions quickly, because tradition gives continuity, security, identity. It connects individuals to something larger than themselves. Deep reflection. When traditions collapse suddenly, people feel lost. In that vacuum, new beliefs rush in, often stronger, often more extreme, because emotional need seeks replacement. The paradox of crowd conservatism and revolution. Crowds resist change until emotion becomes overwhelming. Then change happens explosively. They do not evolve gradually, they shift dramatically, replacing one belief with another. History moves through waves of belief, not steady logic. The danger of absolute belief. When belief becomes sacred, doubt equals betrayal, opposition equals enemy, compromise equals weakness. Dialogue disappears, conflict rises, because sacred beliefs are not negotiated, they are defended. Scene, the divided crowd. Two groups, each convinced of moral truth, each emotionally certain, each seeing the other as a threat, both driven by belief, both unable to step back. That is how conflicts escalate, not from lack of intelligence, but from emotional certainty. Key insight. Crowds do not search for truth, they search for meaning. Whoever provides a belief system that explains their emotions guides them. Beliefs are the architecture of collective behavior. Closing atmosphere, Part 4 expanded. Now you see the deepest layer of crowd psychology. Emotion ignites crowds. Leaders direct them, but beliefs sustain them. Beliefs turn moments into movements, movements into history. And once a belief becomes sacred in a crowd, it can outlive generations. We classify the different types of crowds and see how the same psychology appears in crime, politics, religion, and everyday life.
Types of crowds, from criminal mobs to political and religious masses. Opening transition. We've explored the crowd mind, its emotions, its leaders, its beliefs. Now we answer the final question. Are all crowds the same? No, but they all share one foundation: emotion over reason, collective identity over individuality. Yet, depending on purpose, structure, and suggestion, crowds take different forms. Dynamic 1. Criminal crowds. These are the most explosive, born from anger, fear, rumors, sudden events. They act fast, without planning, without foresight. Looting, violence, destruction. But here's the strange truth. Individuals inside may not be criminals alone. The crowd creates the crime. Responsibility dissolves. Emotion takes control. The crowd becomes a psychological storm. Reflection.
Many who regret actions later say, "I don't know what came over me. It wasn't just emotion, it was the crowd mind." Jury crowds. Yes, even juries behave like crowds. Even educated individuals, when deciding together, become influenced by emotion, dominant personalities, collective mood. Decisions often follow persuasive voices, confidence, narratives, more than pure logic. This shows crowd psychology works even in formal systems. Electoral crowds. Voters are influenced by images, slogans, emotional appeals, repetition. Complex policies rarely move the masses, but simple ideas do. Change, hope, security, freedom. Political campaigns are not debates of logic. They are battles for emotional resonance. Key truth. The crowd does not choose the most rational program. It chooses the idea that feels right. Religious crowds. These are among the most powerful, driven by faith, sacrifice, devotion, absolute belief. They can endure suffering, hardship, and death because belief replaces fear. Religious crowds shaped civilizations for centuries. They prove the crowd can achieve extraordinary endurance when driven by deep conviction. Political and revolutionary crowds. These change history. They arise when belief plus emotion plus leadership reach critical intensity. They can overthrow systems, topple leaders, and reshape nations. But they also bring instability, because crowds are powerful at destruction, less skilled at reconstruction. Organized versus spontaneous crowds. Some crowds form suddenly, riots, panics, mass hysteria. Others are structured, parties, movements, religious institutions. Structured crowds are more stable. Spontaneous crowds are more volatile. But both share the same psychology. Deep reflection. A crowd is like fire. Small and controlled equals warmth, energy, unity. Uncontrolled equals destruction. The same psychological force can build nations or burn them. Final insight of the book. Civilization stands on a fragile balance. Individual reason versus collective emotion. Crowds are inevitable. They will always exist. The question is not, how do we eliminate crowds? The question is, who influences them? What beliefs guide them? What emotions move them? Because the future of societies is written not only by thinkers, but by crowds. Closing atmosphere. Now you see the invisible force behind history. Not just leaders, not just events, but the deep psychological currents moving masses of people. Once you understand crowd psychology, you start seeing it everywhere. In media, in politics, in markets, online, in movements, and perhaps you learn to step back before the crowd mind steps into you. The Psychology of Crowds, Extended Edition. Deep Expanded, the different forms of crowds in real life. A crowd is not just a gathering. It is a psychological state that can appear anywhere. In streets, in courtrooms, in stadiums, in elections, on social media. The setting changes. The human nervous system does not. So now we move from theory to the living forms of the crowd mind. Dramatic opening. 1. Criminal crowds, when emotion overrides law. These crowds are born suddenly. A spark, an incident, a rumor. Emotional heat rises faster than understanding. Inside such crowds, inhibition drops, impulse rises, responsibility dissolves. People act first and think later. Scene: the moment of escalation. A protest begins peacefully. One person throws an object. The act breaks an invisible psychological barrier. Others follow, not because they planned to, but because the crowd mind shifted from restraint to release. Once that threshold is crossed, behavior spreads like fire. Why regret comes later. After the event, individuals say, "That wasn't me." And in a psychological sense, they are partly right. The individual self was submerged. The collective self was in control. 2. Jury and decision crowds. Group thinking in formal settings. Even structured environments do not escape crowd influence. A jury, a committee, a board. On paper, decisions should be rational, but psychology intervenes. Dominant voices steer direction. Emotional tone shapes judgment. Confidence overweights uncertainty. People align to maintain group harmony. This is called group conformity pressure. The desire for agreement can overpower private doubt. Reflection. How many times have you agreed in a meeting while privately feeling unsure? That subtle pressure is the small-scale version of crowd psychology. 3. Electoral crowds. Politics of emotion. Campaigns don't sell policies, they sell feelings, hope, fear, pride, security, belonging. A slogan succeeds not because it is detailed, but because it resonates emotionally. The voter often chooses the narrative that best matches inner emotion. Scene: the rally. Music, flags, chants. The environment is designed to synchronize emotion. Once synchronized, the individual evaluates less and feels more. 4. Religious crowds. Faith as power. These crowds show the highest level of devotion. Belief reduces fear. Certainty gives strength. Individuals accept sacrifice because meaning overweighs self-preservation. Religious crowds built civilizations, but when intolerance enters, they can also divide societies. 5. Revolutionary crowds, when history turns. These emerge when long frustration, new belief, charismatic leadership combine. Emotion reaches a breaking point. Change happens rapidly. But here lies the paradox. Crowds are powerful at overthrowing, less skilled at organizing long-term systems. Revolution is emotional. Governance is rational. 6. Digital crowds, the fastest crowd in history. Today's crowd no longer needs physical space. It forms through screens. A viral post creates mass outrage, mass support, mass judgment within hours. Emotional contagion is now global and instant. The nervous system responds as if we are in a physical crowd, but the scale is planetary. Deep reflection. In the past, crowd influence was local. Today, it is continuous. We live inside overlapping digital crowds every day. Organized versus spontaneous crowds. Organized crowds, movements, institutions, parties, have structure and leadership. Spontaneous crowds, riots, panics, flash outrage, are unpredictable and volatile. Both operate emotionally, but structure slows chaos slightly. The final synthesis. Criminal crowds show emotional explosion. Political crowds show emotional persuasion. Religious crowds show emotional devotion. Digital crowds show emotional acceleration. Different faces, same psychology. Closing atmosphere. Crowds are not an exception to society. They are a permanent layer of human behavior. To understand history, to understand media, to understand movements, is to understand the crowd mind. And perhaps the greatest skill today is to feel collective emotion without losing individual awareness.